G'day and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon on Saturday. The afternoon sessions, we've got a little series of sessions focusing on IoT and micropython and that kind of thing, so I hope you will enjoy them. This is Anthony, who's here to talk about water efficiency for home agriculture using micropython and IoT. Please make him very welcome.
Thank you very much, everyone. That's a really warm welcome. I appreciate it. So today I'd like to talk a bit about a little journey I went through on using IoT to help grow some herbs in a water-efficient way. So just to get started, and apologies, I'm actually from Sydney, so I'm probably going to make a mistake with the pronunciation, but we're on the we're on the lands of Nam, the traditional owners who are the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And given that this talk is a little bit about agriculture, I thought I might share a little bit of learning that I did researching the area on some of the ways that the traditional owners had actually used some of the plants in our area. So one of the first being kangaroo grass. The traditional owners would use the stems and leaves to make string for fishing nets. The red-fruited saw sledge, the seeds were ground up into a paste, which would make a really simple bread. And the southern grass tree, the roots were eaten, and the nectar from the flowers, when soaked in water, would actually produce a really sweet drink. So it kind of just goes to show our traditional owners actually took care of the land and were the earliest scientists that we probably had worldwide. So just to give you a talk, an overview of how my talk's going to sound, I'm going to talk a bit about the problem and the inspiration behind it, the journey I kind of went through and the different stages, and ultimately just cover some of the lessons I learned. And I guess just as a disclaimer, I'm barely an engineer, let alone a lawyer, but if you do plan on following this similar journey and growing stuff that you plan to eat, follow good safety advice, make sure you use food-safe soil, water, and seeds, because it would be terrible if someone got sick following this. So, as most of you probably know, we've been watering plants for as long as people have been around. But walking around with a jug is pretty efficient, but it can be a bit exhausting. It doesn't scale well, and heaven forbid if you do go on vacation or you're not able to water your plants, they can die. So it would be great if we could start to automate these kind of processes. And similarly as well, we've had like timer-based watering systems, which might be electrically monitored or just on a simple thing where basically at a certain time of the day it would water your plants. And this is great because it means that we've automated this process, but as you probably see in this picture here, you can sometimes overwater your plants. And if that doesn't cause damage to the plants themselves, it can at the very least start to waste water. And I think everybody here knows about climate change and everything like that. Would be just kind of being redundant and saying, I think everybody knows we should try to conserve water. But now I'm seeing actually more consumer-grade technologies, which is watering plants on a more dynamic basis. So instead of watering on a schedule, it's more event-driven in the sense of if the soil starts to get drier, we will then start to add more water. It is a little bit more complicated, but as you can imagine, this optimizes our water usage as well. And this is kind of where we want to kind of go with this. But let's do it with a bit of an IoT thing, because this is a tech conference after all. So the Plant IO kit is made by a Newcastle-based company, Core Electronics. I'm not sponsored by them or anybody else in this talk, but go show them some love because they are pretty awesome. It is a consumer-grade kit you can buy from their website, and I'll start to go into a little bit of detail about that, but yeah, please feel free to take photos of that. That's their pictures, not mine. So this is the brains behind this one is the Raspberry Pi Pico. Because being a Python conference, this is running MicroPython. So this one's that's taking IoT, reading some IoT sensors, controlling other devices, and operating as we would. And this device here that measures the reading is a capacitive soil moisture sensor. So this one measures the electrical resistance between two probes. And obviously, if there's more water in the soil, the conductivity is higher, and obviously have a higher reading than if the soil was dry, where there's lower conductivity and there's less electricity. In particular, there are different varieties of moisture sensors, and some of them will expose the copper or whatever metal sensors directly to the soil. Over time, this can start to leach, they can start to erode, and as you can imagine, that starts to leach heavy metals into your soil. So there are sensors like this one here where they are corrosion resistant. And as a result of that, when we now say, look, I can now measure my soil, I want to start pumping water into my plants. So this is a peristaltic pump, and it's electrically controlled. So I only recently found out about these by doing this. So a peristaltic pump, I found a nice video of how this one works. So it has a very flexible pipe, and the motor will kind of turn around, and it will push water through the pipe. So from whatever reservoir, water will flow through the pipe out to where your plants are. Some of the cool things that happens with this is that, as you could notice from this, the liquid doesn't come in contact with the motor. So this actually has some pretty useful applications in like medical and health, where you don't want your medicine or whatever liquid to come in contact with motors or anything like that. So this actually works pretty well, albeit it's a little bit big. So at least from a systems perspective, we read the soil moisture, we've input those data into an algorithm, and we say, is the soil dry? And if it is, we activate our pump to pump water into our plants, creating a feedback loop. And hope that, oh, actually, that's not too bad. I wasn't sure how that was going to come out on the screen. So as you can imagine from a Python code, we do follow a similar process where we read the value from our sensor to know how dry or wet our soil is. Then in the particular case here, we just pass that on to a motor function, which is nicely abstracted for us, that will determine how long it needs to run the motor for. And this works pretty well, as it turns out. There's also a moisture threshold here, and that is a setting that we can change that would change as the name implies, the threshold at which we start to activate the pump. And this is something that would be configurable depending on the environment you're in, and also what plants you're growing as well. As anyone who's probably grown plants or any kind of fruit or vegetable, things have different water requirements. So this is something that you can tune when you do that. One other thing I might have noticed that I might have missed out was the little timer circuit here. So this will run on a schedule, and what this timer does is it turns on at a predefined interval, and when that is active, it goes and runs a main.py file, and then when it turns off after it's finished, and then just continues a loop. So this is how we get that periodic behavior. So we end up, and of course, I forgot to actually mention, planted some seeds while we're at it. It's kind of the big part of it. So this is an actual video I kind of took off my kitchen benchtop where I was doing all this experimentation next to the air fryer. And this is basically the pump running, as you might see from my very shaky hands eventually. This is the pump running when it is running low on water. So I did take a time-lapse video with a GoPro that I had lying around of the seeds growing over time. And you might notice the day-night cycles. It takes around 3 or 4 days from planting the seeds through to actually seeing them grow. And yeah, it actually worked out pretty nicely. And yeah, I ended up having to move the GoPro a little bit. That's why the footage is a bit shaky. But yeah, it actually, as you could imagine, we ended up growing some seeds. And that's not the end of the story. But yeah, I think I'll just let that one go. Yeah, it worked. Yay. So I kind of started to ask some questions like, well, this is great and all. We're just measuring the moisture of the soil, but is there any other factors that go into this environmentally? So as you imagine, this kind of project ended up just like spiraling out of control. So I at least was starting to keep track of my learnings here. So yeah, I can grow herbs with minimizing water. But then I decided, well, let's start to measure some of the other environments in my sad single-bedroom apartment. And I had some environmental sensors. So here's 4 of them. So we had the atmospheric sensor, we had an air quality sensor, a ambient light sensor, and a distance sensor. And one might be wondering why I use a distance sensor. I had this theory of, wouldn't it be cool if we could measure the distance between the top of the lid of the little pot that I had versus the soil? And ostensibly, when the plant would grow further and further, the distance would get shorter. So could I potentially measure the seeds growing through that? I thought it's just a hypothesis. Let's see how it goes. So I end up running some experiments, capturing some data, and the line in the red is the moisture level. And the white line is the amount of seconds that the pump ran. God, Linda's going to hate me for these. None of it has any act. I've kind of broken all the rules for charting here, so I'm just realizing that just now. And as you can see here, when we go above a certain moisture threshold, the pump stops working. So we're starting to see the behavior that we were expecting to see. So we started to look into, well, does the ambient temperature or the humidity have an effect? At least just from eyeballing it, it didn't really look too well. Similar thing with the air quality. There was not much, there was too much noise. Probably it's just more my cooking, if anything else, that was starting to have an effect on things. The distance sensor was interesting, where it did start to see a general trend, but I don't know what caused that noise in the end. And sadly, the ambient, well, it's actually somewhat to expect. The ambient lights just detected the on-off days from the from the different days I had. So, I mean, look, if I had a little more time and was a little bit smarter, you could probably put this into like a machine learning algorithm, which would probably find correlations between a bunch of different parameters and the growth and the pump duration. But at least for now, I didn't really see any direct correlation between some of those key values I was trying to monitor. So it's a little bit bummed out, but I thought, well, look, let's just go back to first principles and see, can I actually start to monitor this remotely? Because for some reason, I had to start traveling for work or other kind of things, and I wasn't there to kind of keep an eye on the experiments. So very quickly, this kind of thing started to go out of control. And the kit actually comes with the Pycon H, which is a pretty awesome device by its own right. But the Pycon W has a Wi-Fi chip on it, and this will let it connect to any 802.11n network, which, as you can imagine now, I can connect to a Wi-Fi network. I can start to upload data that I collect. So I ended up starting to upload data. I used InfluxDB for this, but you can use Elastic. Thank you, Elastic sponsors. See, I'm trying to do that marketing thing. Or any other, Kafka, any time-based, cloud-based solution. Just happened to use Influx because it was easier to set up for a hobby project. So there's another bit of MicroPython code. For anyone who's done any web-based programming, it's a really similar thing of I'm going to set up the payload of my post request. I'm going to use U requests to do a post HTTP call to my InfluxDB server, and I'm going to do a horrid thing of just catching all exceptions here, but didn't really care too much about it, but don't judge me. And it worked. We were able to send data to an InfluxDB server and start to see data coming through that. One of the biggest advantages of going down this route was every time I wanted to start to inspect what data I had, I'd have to stop the microcontroller, connect it to a computer, download the log files, then restart the thing. This one can then just run fully autonomously. I don't need to worry about it. So this is a huge advantage of that. And I can start to see what was happening whilst my experiments were running. And this worked out pretty well. And I thought it would be nice to also see the growth of the plant as well, to have another data point to connect to. So once again, kind of adding more complexity to this, decided to buy the regular Raspberry Pi and use the Pi high quality camera to start to actually monitor, to have a physical camera looking at the plant growth. And this also meant that I could connect the Pycon W straight through to the Raspberry Pi and then remote desktop into the Pi and then start to control the Pycon W remotely. So using your standard AnthonyI IDE. So this actually started to kind of become a pretty cool way to monitor things remotely, make sure that the software hadn't crashed or anything like that. So Ended up setting this up once again in my kitchen. Yeah, you can see the sandwich press, but the air fryer is further down. And we did have the camera mounted on the top just beneath my microwave, and that was pointing down at the little pot. And yeah, so change it to using a Raspberry Pi. And we started to get some pretty cool photos with the telephoto lens on the camera. So this is just as we kind of planted it. Oh God, this photo didn't really come out too great. It looks nicer on the laptop screen, I'll have to tell you that. We could start to see the seeds starting to grow, and it was starting to sprout a little bit more. And I ended up stitching all this together and making a little time-lapse video, which I don't think anyone can really see except for me on my nice screen here. Let's just try to fast forward through this. Because it does take a little while, but that's just mainly like seeds sprouting further down to establish roots and then sprouting up to get there. Now you can kind of hopefully see some of them coming up. But yeah, I'm really sorry the videos didn't come out too well. But you might be able to see just some up at the top there. This is what happens when you film it in your kitchen. So, to keep track of my learnings, yeah, I was actually able to monitor the growth of these herbs remotely, and it worked pretty well. So I thought, okay, look, let's just keep on learning. And I think we're starting to make a little bit more progress here. Didn't have much luck with the environmental sensors, but we're taking all this video footage. Can we start to do something with that, with these photos? And for some reason, I was starting to think about computer vision and started to go down yet another rabbit hole. So I think I took this on a Melbourne trip a few weeks ago of your wonderful light rail system, or trams. So just took a plain video, and I thought, you know, let's just have something to kind of compare against. So I used the pre-trained YOLO version 11 library, and it does a pretty darn good job. Like, this is pretty powerful. I think it did misinterpret someone's animal carrier as a handbag, but it does pretty well. Like, I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised by how powerful YOLO 11 was. And I took another video of outside a hotel, just people cycling past, different cars, trucks, people walking by. And when I ran the YOLO 11 model, it does a pretty darn good job. It can figure out, hey, this is a car and this is the direction it's traveling in. And I thought, this looks pretty darn cool. I want to see whether this can actually run with some of the videos I'm taking. And yeah, it didn't really work too well. And oh, cool. So yeah, unfortunately, it's the day-night cycles, we get another thing. If you're in darkness and you don't have any artificial light, you are not going to be able to do any image processing on it. It's another... When you say it out loud, it makes sense, but when you're doing it, it's like, oh yeah, I'll give this a shot. So the pre-trained models didn't do it, and that's okay. I mean, these models are trained for a generic set of circumstances. I wouldn't expect it to work for my particular one. And I also had another one. That one didn't do too well either. So yeah, it's just one of the things of like just trying stuff out, seeing it not working, and then keep on trying other kind of stuff. So now here's where I added even more complexity to things. So now we had the Raspberry Pi, which was taking photos of our seeds, which was still being controlled by the Pycon AU. But now that we started to capture some footage, we could then put it into RoboFlow or that Ultralytics, any computer vision system to start to do some computer vision on it. So there's a long and boring task of going and marking up all your different images with annotating them with, I only did 2 classes. One was like, can I count the seeds and can I count the leaves when I started to see them grow? It's a tedious process, and I kind of got bored midway through doing the tagging, and I realized I should probably actually start building my slide deck sometime between this. And any real data scientist who knows what they're doing, except for me, would probably say I had really low confidence intervals, and I'm running this model on the same data I trained it on. It's really bad hygiene here, but at least it starts to work. Like, it actually seemed to do a pretty good job. So I was actually starting to be happy, but I was like, yeah, I'm going to set my expectations pretty low here, that this is not really working out too well. But at least for like a first cut of like, am I at least on the right track? I was actually pretty satisfied with what was happening. So, and of course, when I used that same pre-trained model or same trained model on a different, it did not work well. And that's, of course, even with the same really low bar of confidence interval, it didn't work well. But that's okay, because this was just a first cut, at least just to test the hypothesis of, can I train a model and see how it works? So, yeah. So to kind of come back to what I've learned, was able to grow herbs with a minimal amount of water. No, I wasn't able to really see any trends just by looking at it. Yeah, I actually could monitor my growth remotely. Kinda can count herbs with computer vision. So far it worked out right. And just talk about like, where do we go from here? Trying other herb types. These were I should actually mention earlier on, these were alfalfa seeds. And they worked out pretty well because they sprout pretty quickly, like 3 or 4 days. And they're pretty resilient as well. They're pretty forgiving kind of plants. There's other herbs, I think, had pretty good luck with parsley, but some other things like coriander was not as forgiving. And so depends on the herb type. Some can be easier to grow than others, but want to kind of try some other ones. And also, try better computer vision models. Actually learn how computer vision works, because I didn't do a good job of it. And also try some machine learning algorithms on it. I did just look at the data and see, do I have trends, and not really. I think some proper, smarter machine learning algorithms would be able to possibly find something I missed out on, especially with different seed types. So I actually want to share some lessons learned, because I think whenever we go to these kind of conferences, we see very smart people, and then you see people like me who kind of come and talk, and it sometimes can be a bit intimidating when you yourself are trying to start out. And one of the reasons I wanted to kind of give this talk and particularly show where things went wrong was that, for me, it reminded me that failure is a part of the learning process, and not everything kind of goes to plan. And it is really important to kind of say, well, look, this didn't work out, but I still gained something, and I kind of can go down a different route. And as a result, keep learning, keep on experimenting, because that failure is not really an end state. It's just an inflection point in your learning. And so I really like this cartoon. I want to make sure I include it. It's just never give up, because it can be really easy to see that failure and stop working. But at least for anything else, I want us to show like something working, something not, and just keep never giving up, because I think it's been a rough year for quite a lot of us. And I just want to at least remind everybody that, don't give up when things go wrong. So happy to take any questions. I do have a GitHub repo of the really bad code that I wrote. And if you want to ask me any questions, I should be somewhere around the conference, and happy to answer any kind of question. So thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate the time.
All right, if anyone has any questions, we can take them for a couple of minutes now. We're running right on time. And I'd just like to present Anthony with this little mug from Pycon, which I expect to see in the background of his next video taken in his kitchen.
It'll be on the next place. Thank you so very much.
All right, who had...
Firstly, just want to say that talks like yours are why I come to this conference, so thanks so much.
Thank you.
And the second question I had is that your primary hypothesis was that you're going to save some water.
Yes.
So did you actually go and confirm whether you're on the right track with that, like in terms of total water used versus growth?
You know what, that's actually a good question. I kind of made that's actually, you actually made me kind of think now, because I don't actually think I actually validated the assumption of saving water, but at least in terms of like the water I used was barely minimal. Like I didn't have to refill the reservoir once, even between experiments. And I would have used maybe a little less than a centimeter worth of water in like a little standard takeaway container, like your rice style, those vertically kind of cylindrical style takeaway containers. Barely used any water out of it. So it was certainly a lot less water than I use when I'm watering my regular plants. So yes.
Yeah, very entertaining. Number one, did you play with the threshold as something to see, like, different thresholds, does it grow faster and whatever? And
I did. And there's actually one failure I didn't actually account for. It is part, I guess, the B-side of the talk, which was when I first set up the kit, for some reason I didn't set up the probe properly, so it just kept pumping water into it. And I was wondering, why am I just seeing like the maximum threshold? And it was because the soil moisture sensor wasn't near enough. So that's actually another thing I learned was you have to be careful where you position the moisture sensor relative to where the water is you're doing, because if they are too far apart, you will never actually get enough water getting through to the sensor to trigger that feedback loop. So making sure you kind of consider where the water source is coming into it and its distance from the moisture sensor was actually another big thing that I learned. So I guess that's actually, I didn't actually answer your question for that, but you saying just reminded me about that. I did start, because one of the things that reminded me of it, because I did start to change the value. And I was wondering, why am I'm changing the moisture sensor value and I'm not seeing any change in the duration. I did kind of reduce it down a bit in some of the really earlier takes that before I started to actually keep track of what I was doing. And yeah, it was just like sometimes you have too much water there and you just see the soil's getting like really moisture logged. And I was like, okay, now I can start to kind of pare back a bit on it. And it is a bit of a tuning process. Like my apartment's pretty warm in general, probably compared to most kind of places. So I think I probably had to have that moisture sensor a little bit tuned higher than what it is. I think even from the tutorial that Core Electronics gave, it was, I think, 35, and I ended up having 37, which is still a negligible change in it. But yeah, I did try changing it.
All right. Do we have time for one more quick question?
What would you like to see in MicroPython to... How should the project grow?
That's an excellent question. I mean, I was actually pretty happy using it. Like, it's got a decent amount from like the core Python itself, like regular C Python that I was just using in general. So I was actually pretty happy with it. And obviously, like the third-party libraries used, they were still pretty darn efficient in their own right. So I was like, just consider me a happy MicroPython user because I just enjoyed using it. I come from Arduino backgrounds, and it can be a bit harder. Arduino is a lot less forgiving than MicroPython is. So, yeah, that was no notes basically. 5 stars, loved it.
Excellent. Please thank Anthony once again.
Thank you very much.